Morning, folks. So what we're going to do today, as Andy said, we're going to talk about hyperconvergence and what it's doing to the data center. So yesterday afternoon, when I took a yellow cab on my way to the San Francisco airport, I usually don't do that. It's Uber or Lyft these days. And yesterday it was a yellow cab. So we got talking. And I asked the cabbie, and the conversation very quickly went to how much Uber and Lyft were disrupting their business. And I started thinking, what kind of a company is Uber? Clearly, they're not a cab company. We know that. So what is Uber? And then the more I thought about it, it dawned on me that Uber is a technology company. It's a technology company that is leveraging IT systems expertise to disrupt what is otherwise a very mature old market, the taxi cab market. And that trend is not isolated, right? You look at LendingTree, what it's doing to the banking system. You look at Airbnb, what it's doing to like the hotel business. All around, you see technologies that are enabling businesses to take a strategic leap on the competition. And business leaders, they see this. And that is what attracts the business leaders to the public cloud. When they look at AWS, when they look at Microsoft Azure, what they see is agility. What they see is elasticity. They look at the cost transparency. All these things make the public clouds attractive to the business leaders. They have elasticity, which let them handle uncertainty. They need to know where the costs are. With public clouds, they get it. But if you look at public clouds, it's not an unalloyed blessing. There's a lot of advantages that you get when you run workloads within your own data center, right? You have control. You can give tighter SLAs to your business partners. You have customization. You have a certain workload. It needs certain special infrastructure. You can run it within your own data center. Public clouds, it's a cookie-cutter model. They have what you got, and you need to fit within that paradigm, right? And finally, there are certain industries where data privacy concerns pretty much rule out adopting the public cloud. Now, at a high level, you can see that that is the dilemma. Traditional infrastructure is making customers choose. Ideally, you'd want to have both of these things. And that is where the promise of hyperconvergence, the promise of Nutanix, we pioneered hyperconvergence, that in a nutshell is what we bring to the table. We say no longer you have to choose. You want the agility, the transparency, the elasticity of public clouds. You want control, customization. You want to keep your data in-house. With hyperconvergence, you get to do both of them. So if you look about what really you need to get to is a data center that is highly agile. And how do you get there? By automating pervasively. But it's a well-received tenet of complexity theory that it's very hard to automate around massive complexity. And if you look at what the state of the modern data center is, a typical three-tier stack, it is nothing but complex. Let's look into any data center that you walk in, right? This is the picture you will see. You have a standard 10 gig Ethernet network. That's the like of vendors like Cisco, HP, Arista, Brocade, Juniper. You have your servers. That's HP, Dell, Cisco, Lenovo. And then you have your storage arrays. And that's the domain of a EMC, a NetApp, a HP, Dell, HDS. But it does not end there. You still need the fiber channel switches for the servers to connect to the storage array. That's your Brocade and Cisco. Doesn't end there. You need specialized equipment in your servers to be able to talk to the SAN. That's your HBAs, the domain of QLogic and Emulex. The reason I'm bringing it up, specialized pieces of equipment, things that are so complex that independent companies exist to serve the market there. And you look at what you have done so far, all you have done, you have brought up the physical infrastructure stack. And these days, most environments are largely virtualized. So on top of it, you have your virtual stack. That's VMware or Microsoft. And then finally, you get to where businesses really care about, which is the applications. And that's the domain of your Oracle, your Microsoft, your SAP. And you can see right there, that is the real crux of the problem. Businesses, they get differentiated at the applications layer. But if you look at infrastructure teams, they have to deal with a lot of complexity in the stack just to keep the applications up and running. Now, it's no wonder then that this is what you see in most data centers, right? It's not because someone did something wrong, right? This is merely an expression of the complexity in the stack. And that is what, if you look at hyperconvergence, the choice cannot be more clear, the choice cannot be more stark. Let's look at when you walk into a data center where there is Nutanix, how the picture changes. We still require a standard 10 gig Ethernet network. So we play nicely with your favorite networking vendor, whether that be HP, Cisco, Arista, Juniper. All we need is an honest 10 gig network, nothing special. Then you have Nutanix, and that's it. That brings up your complete physical infrastructure, right? You run all your VMs and everything on top. You have a virtual layer. We have VMware that you can run on top of Nutanix. You have Microsoft Hyper-V. And you also can run our variant, our hypervisor, KVM-based, on top of Nutanix physical infrastructure. And then you have the apps. And right there, you see the choice cannot be more clear, right? It's very clear that with Nutanix, it's a fundamentally simpler stack that we bring to the data center. And this is also what sets us apart from what the industry calls converged systems. Because if you look at a converged system like FlexPod or vBlock, they all look like the old stack. All they do is just tell you, hey, I have tested that this version of the switch works with that version of the storage array, works with this version of the firmware, so on and so forth. The fundamental complexity still remains there. With Nutanix, we have drastically simplified the stack. Now, let's spend a little bit of time as to how we actually do it at the highest level so that we have a clear understanding of how the product actually would look like in your data center. We take industry standard servers, x86 servers, single socket, dual socket, you name it. All of the servers, which we call nodes, have some amount of flash and some amount of spinning disk in them. Then we are a solution for virtualized environments. So there's a hypervisor on top of all of our nodes. And our software, which runs as a controller VM on top of the hypervisor, that essentially pools all of the storage together across all of the nodes and presents it as a single storage pool to the hypervisor. And that's it. The illusion to the hypervisor is perfect, and it's complete. The hypervisor doesn't know, ESXi running on the servers does not know that it's not talking to a storage array. Why is that important? All of your applications that can run on an ESXi or a Hyper-V, when you bring Nutanix in, you don't have to worry. We slide just right in. Anything that runs on your existing VMware environment, anything that runs on your existing Microsoft environment, it will all run just fine. Now, what are the key things that sort of stand out in the architecture, right? The first thing, you see that we have the very highest end of enterprise-grade features. Snapshot, clones, deduplication, compression, asynchronous replication, synchronous replication, you name it. Anything that you are familiar with in the very highest end storage array, you get it with Nutanix. We support 3 different hypervisors, ESXi, Hyper-V, and our KVM-based Acropolis hypervisor. And the final thing is we offer linear scale-out. While to the hypervisor we present ourselves as a single data store, physically, the infrastructure has been chunked up. And that is key. Because once you make infrastructure small, bite-sized, it aligns more with what the business needs are. As a company, we are completely open and transparent about our technology. We truly believe that the more people get familiar with our architecture, the more they review, the more there's a conversation, we'll get feedback, it will make our products better, it will make our technology better, it will make our people and company better, right? So highly recommend, if you have some time, Google Nutanix Bible. We have one of our solution architects who's maintains this wonderful site, and it's a veritable treasure trove of technical information about our architecture. So it's a great place to spend some time on if you want to get familiar with how Nutanix actually works. But let's now spend some time on why hyperconvergence is relevant to you and what it can do for you and your data center. If you look at a data center, it's characterized by a life cycle. What do? You buy infrastructure, and then once you have bought it, you get it, you rack stack it, and then you provision and you deploy your applications. And then you get into what I call the steady state of your data center, which is you manage and monitor and maintain the infrastructure. Every so often, 6 months, 9 months down the road, you have a new project that came in, or an application needs to grow. You need to grow your environment. And then finally, 3 or 4 years go by, you need to refresh your infrastructure. And that's it. It's a life cycle, right? The whole thing keeps going on and on and on, right? And let us look at how, in each of these different phases, what hyperconvergence can do for you. Let's look at the buy phase. If you look at the buy phase, in the traditional IT model, it essentially imposes a lot of burden on the buyer, a lot of stress. What do I mean by that? Most infrastructure projects, they come in, someone says, look, I need to buy infrastructure for 300 VMs. Well, in most cases, you don't really know. No one really knows the future. You may think you need 300 VMs today. Maybe the architect guessed incorrectly. Maybe you actually needed 400. Maybe 2 months later, something changes. You need more infrastructure. It's 500, right? 12 months down the road, maybe it's 700, right? You can see the problem is what traditional infrastructure does, it forces you to make a decision. You have to be a fortune teller to know exactly how much you will need in 3 or 5 years' time. You can't do that. It's just not possible. So what happens? Systemic overbuying. People typically buy a lot more infrastructure than they have a need for it at the moment. And it's what I call a classic lose-lose situation. The growth doesn't happen, so you just now bought infrastructure that you don't have a use for. Even if the growth actually materializes, it doesn't happen day one. It takes probably 12 months, 18 months for the growth to happen. And during that time, you have infrastructure that you bought, and it was just lying unused. Very poor return on investment. If you look at now the Nutanix story, it is what we call no guesswork infrastructure. You have a project, you have a need, you think you need 300 VMs, don't worry. Don't stress about it. Buy a few Nutanix blocks that can host 300 VMs. 3 months down the road, you figure out something went wrong, people had figured the sizing incorrectly, or a new project came in, no problem. 400 VMs, you get another block, you're good. A year down the road, some more projects come in, you need to grow the environment, you get a few more blocks, and you're good. The point is that with Nutanix, infrastructure is always right size. It's highly utilized, and all of this leads to you getting a really good return on your investment. Let's move to the deploy phase. How many of us have been in situations where infrastructure shows up and weeks and months goes by and it still remains in the packing boxes? Right? Why is that the case? Because traditional infrastructure is bulky. It is power hungry. You have to find space. The boxes show up. I don't have rack space in my data center. Oh, I have rack space, but it doesn't have enough power. All of these things. Weeks or months go by before you actually get to rack and stack it. Finally, you do. Now, that's all done. Now begins the painful and arduous task of actually provisioning the infrastructure. This is where the complexity hits you. You set up your LUNs, you set up your fiber channel routing, you set up LUN masking, RAID groups, all that gobbledygook, your head starts hurting, right? And the upshot of all of this, your businesses, they want the projects to be set up faster. The infrastructure holds you back. What was supposed to be a 3-month project ends up being 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. Let's look at the Nutanix alternative, right? In our case, we are compact and dense. So we go in, and it's very easy for people to slide us onto their existing data center environments, right? We routinely have customers who, when we go in, they have one rack worth of infrastructure that gets compressed into just 4 RU, a couple of hour blocks. It's very easy for you to find space for Nutanix in your data center because we are compact. And then, because our stack is simple, when you look at Nutanix, you can, I routinely, in fact, one of our solution architects, Michael Webster, his 10-year-old son, actually can provision VMs on Nutanix. It's that simple. When you have to provision a VM on Nutanix, all you need to know about storage is how much storage does the VM need. You don't need to know anything about iSCSI, fiber channel, none of that stuff, right? It's like you don't need to know anything about how much CPU and memory a VM needs. Similarly with storage, all you need to know with Nutanix is, does the VM need a 100 gigabyte disk or does it need a 500 gigabyte disk? It's that simple. And what does that result in? Routinely, we have customers who, when they get Nutanix, within half an hour, they're on to deploying VMs on the infrastructure. Projects, they get done super fast with Nutanix. Now, you go to the manage phase. This is what I call the steady state of your data center. You have deployed your application, things are running, and you have to manage and maintain the infrastructure. It breaks down into 2 big chunks of activities. The first one is what I call life cycle operations. That has to do with upgrades and firmware patches and firmware updates, things of that sort. And the second one has to do with troubleshooting when things go wrong. Let's look into what traditional data center stacks, how they behave under these circumstances, right? Let's look at the upgrade scenario. You have your stack, and you have your storage array from your favorite vendor. You are trying to do a routine upgrade. You had planned for like maybe 4 hours time, carefully planned. You were thinking, one weekend, 4 hours, I get in Saturday, I will do it when people are not using it, kind of, and then things will be fine. And so you actually perform the upgrade on the storage array. And it so happens, when you do the upgrade, turns out the new version in the storage array exposes a bug in the fiber channel switch. And now all hell breaks loose. Data center's down, you have angry phone calls, all of that. And then you upgrade the version on the fiber channel switch. That in turn turns out exposes something in the HBA, so on and so forth. Before you know, what was supposed to be a very routine 4-hour planned upgrade becomes like 2 weeks of hell. Right? And that is the reality that exists today in the data centers. And it's not because of any one vendor's sort of inefficiency. It is, again, merely a reflection that the stack is complex. You look at the troubleshooting side. The story is even funnier over there. What's the day in the life of a typical data center professional? There's a call by some user, some application is running slow, and there's a IT ticket, and now it's your job to find the needle in the haystack, right? Is it the application problem? Is it the virtualization problem? Is it a problem on the storage array? Is it the SANs problem? Is it the HBA problem? All of that. And we all know how that movie plays out, right? You call support, the storage guy says it's the network's problem, the network says it's the fiber channel network's problem, it's the server's problem. Weeks and months go by. And again, you see what is the root cause of the complexity? Why is it that difficult, right? There's a fundamental problem. In the stack, there are mismatched abstractions. The compute layer, it thinks in terms of VMs. The storage layer, it thinks in terms of LUNs. So to answer what should be a very trivial question, I have my Oracle rack running, it's 5 VMs. I just need to know how many IOPS and everything it's taking. In a traditional stack, that's not a trivial question to answer. Why? Because the storage array is a LUN, and it's serving like 5 other applications. It's very difficult to find these routine bits of information. And that's what makes the point that if you have a problem, it takes weeks or months to actually fix it. And if you look at Nutanix, on the other hand, we are one-click infrastructure. What do we mean by that? Upgrade, so you have a 32-node cluster, and you want to do an upgrade of our software. We put it out on our support portal, and you will get an alert on the Prism console that, hey, there's a new version available. and a screen pops up asking you, do you want to upgrade? And say you wanted to. You just hit that button, and then you go outside, grab some coffee, come back in half hour. The upgrade's done. We have, in a seamless fashion, distributed the software to all of the nodes in the cluster, and then upgraded them one by one with zero downtime to the applications without any involvement from you. All we have asked of you is, let us know if you want to do the upgrade. That's it. So you can see, again, the theme that anything that we do with infrastructure, the point is to make sure we give you the tools by which you have time for yourself so that you can do stuff that's more relevant and more meaningful to the business and not have to spend time on infrastructure minutia. You look at now the troubleshooting side. Why is it easier? A, because the stack is simple. There's less moving pieces. Anytime there's less moving pieces, there's easier to debug what's the cause. But even more important, with Nutanix, in the entire hyperconverged stack, the only abstraction that we bring forth is a VM. That's it. There is no such thing as a LAN. There is no other entity that exists. Everything that we do, every single bit of information, in the end, relates back to a VM. How does it help? You want to answer the same question? I have 5 VMs which form my Oracle application. I want to know their IOPS. Boom. With Nutanix, it's just one click, the screen pops up. You get like how much IOPS it uses on average, how much it uses at peak, all of that kind of stuff. Capacity planning. You are running out of resources, storage, and everything. We will distill it down into a single easy number. You'll get it on Prism that, hey, you're going to be running out of memory or compute or storage in a certain number of days. Again, the whole theme is you don't have to think about infrastructure. Let the system do the thinking for you. You focus on stuff that's more relevant for the business, right? And because of this, routinely, customers with Nutanix, they said, the same problem, if it happened in my old data center, it would have taken me months. With Nutanix, I can get to it literally within a few hours. That's the power of simplicity in the stack. Now you go into the grow phase. And this is where I think traditional data center stacks make it extremely hard on our customers. You have your environment up and running, and eventually there's a new project and a new application that needs to be brought up, and you don't have space in the existing environment to bring it up. So what do? You have 2 choices. You can either do a painful forklift upgrade, right? So you go and say, I was on the mid-range array, and now I'll bring on the big, the big storage array, and then look at a painful, costly, risky migration from the old one to the new one. Or you may choose to not do that, and then that's your choice. You bring another one of the same arrays, and then you are looking at a complex dual environment management. This is not something that's really a choice. But yet, the reality is that all across, as an industry, this is the choice that we have given our customers. Anytime your infrastructure essentially gets maxed out, you are looking at discrete, disruptive transitions. Either you buy the bigger box, hundreds of thousands of dollars, couple of months, painful migrations, or you bring in another one, and before you know, there's a whole farm of arrays that you are managing. You look at Nutanix, and we are scale when you need infrastructure. And it's funny, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and I look at her. I mean, she assembles Lego blocks, and she will put like 5 of them, and then forget about it, and then come back in a week, and then slap on 2 more, forget about it, come back after 2 weeks, put some few more, right? Nutanix is just like that. You need infrastructure, you buy something, 300 VMs, no problem. 6 months down the road, there's a new project. Maybe you had us in for your SQL Server environment. Maybe there's a new VDI project. No problem. You get a couple of more Nutanix blocks. You handle that. A year down the road, something else happens. Your business is growing. Your IT infrastructure needs are growing. You just get a few Nutanix blocks, and the system keeps growing. The key thing we scale out with linear performance, right? There is no discrete step jump that the infrastructure makes you go through. Your applications, the fact that we are growing, your applications don't notice it. It's completely smooth. There's no forklift upgrade. And at the same time, you have easy single system management. So you start with Nutanix, maybe it's a 4-node cluster. And you go after like 18 months, it's become a 16-node. After 3 years, it's become a 20-node, 24-node cluster, right? It's still a single system. The ease of management that you had on day one, the exact same ease of management you would have 3 years down the road. Now, let's look at the final stage. What I say, when it comes time to refresh the infrastructure. And even out here, it's almost like, in many ways, like a painful breakup, right? You had your old array, and you had, it's done its job. 4 years have gone by. You're looking at upgrading it. And the vendor comes around and says, here's our latest and greatest. Here's the new shiny toy. And you bring it in. And so you do. And what happens? It's a complex, risky project. Oh, how do I get the new array? How do I get it connected to the existing server farm? You use technologies like storage replication, storage vMotion, all of that. To do what? Just to move data from one array to another. And this is not an infrequent activity, right? I mean, if you look at storage, the life cycle is 4 years. So routinely, in a year, 25% of your data center is just going through a storage refresh. And what is it that you're doing? Does the business care even in the slightest? No. All you're doing, literally, is moving data from one place to another in your data center. And why? Because you have to do it. Given a choice, you would not rather. But this is what traditional infrastructure makes you do, right? Spend your time in activities that have no value to the business, and then when the businesses come and say, why can't this project be done in 2 months, you have no answer because all of your time is sucked up in these kinds of activities. You look at Nutanix, we are what we call evergreen infrastructure. So the same example with Nutanix, you have a Nutanix cluster, you have been using it for 3-4 years, and we have our new generation blocks. You get them in, slide it in, the same cluster. You go to Prism, our management console, and you pick the old nodes, click, 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 and you tell the software, move the data away from the old nodes. That's it. Again, you go outside, grab some coffee, come back after half a day. The system has automatically moved data from the old nodes to the new nodes. And an alert pops up that says, you can now remove the old nodes. And you can see because of that, the entire process of dealing with routine lifecycle operations with Nutanix is become super simple. Because we are scale out, the act of buying, the act of growing infrastructure, there's no stress, there's no risk. And because we are simple, it's quick to deploy applications. It's quick to meet the needs of the business, right? And you don't spend time doing routine things like upgrades and refresh. And the upshot of all of this is there's been extremely fast adoption of Nutanix's technology in our customers' data centers. It doesn't matter what the industry vertical is, whether it's financial services, whether it's retail, whether it's manufacturing, healthcare, the public sector, we have seen tremendous adoption of our technology to the point that we have become the fastest growing infrastructure company in the last decade. And all of that, it's not because of clever marketing. I mean, we do that, but it's because truly we believe we are changing something in the data center. And that is about radically simplifying the data center. Now, anytime there's a big disruptive shift, the people who have the most to lose, the incumbent vendors, they always try to box you in. And that's not something unusual. That's what you would expect. In our case, we have seen through, kind of the various forms of denial, if you will. So you will routinely see things like, oh, Nutanix, they are good, but they are technology for the smaller environments, the mid-market. Oh, Nutanix is good, but they handle only, VDI deployments. Nutanix is good, but it's only for branch infrastructure, right? This is all about trying to pigeonhole because they see it's like the canary in the coal mine, right? When we get into a customer's data center, our attachment to people who actually adopt and use our technology, it's visceral. You use our, I strongly encourage any one of you, use our products for a month and then truly evaluate for yourself compared to managing the old stack, is that a better existence? And our technology, it can run any workload. In fact, we have customers that have trusted their entire data center to Nutanix. The mission-critical applications, the Oracle, the SAP, the SQL servers, all of that. Of course, we do VDI extremely well. We have big data environments, Splunk. It's an extremely good application that runs on Nutanix. We have customers taking us for actual private cloud projects, whether it's with Microsoft Azure, with VMware Stack, or even with OpenStack. We go routinely into data center environments, branch environments, remote office environments. We go into like DR data center environments. The point is, as long as something runs in a virtual machine, Nutanix is the right infrastructure for it. That's it. As long as you have made the choice to virtualize a workload, the hyperconverged infrastructure from Nutanix is going to be ideal infrastructure to run it. You don't have to worry about whether, is this sort of a workload right for hyperconvergence. Now, the other thing that you see is anytime there's a big shift, like I said, the choice between Nutanix does hyperconvergence and the traditional IT stack, that's very clear. And anytime there's a big shift in technology and the shift is real, it's only to be expected that a lot of other people will jump in and try to sort of swim in our wake. And so a lot of that is happening. Again, nothing unusual, nothing unexpected. But it's important to look at how we see our technology being differentiated. And the way we look at it at a high level is on these two pillars. We rely on web-scale engineering, and we worship consumer-grade design. What do I mean by web-scale engineering? It's all of the things that really make our product resilient and be able to scale to any environment that you want. It's a bit like when BMW says, their cars are made with German engineering. It's sort of that ethos that we are appealing to. Because what it says is, we know that most of our customers, you would be running in your data center hundreds of nodes, maybe thousands of nodes. But if you wanted to, we know that you most likely wouldn't, but if you wanted to, you could take our technology, you could take our products, and you could scale it to like 10,000 nodes, and our products and our technology, we won't blink. That's what web-scale engineering is. You look at consumer-grade design, and that is all about bringing some amount of joy back to the data center. We routinely understand our users, people who are in the data center, they spend 8-10 hours every day dealing with it. That's literally 1/3 of your life. And in the end, we are all people, and it always helps if that, the daily existence is better. So what we do with Prism, our management console, we make things intuitive. If you are trying to spin up a VM, what you think would be the case is what you find in Prism. We make it super insightful. So if something's going wrong, with a couple of clicks, you can get to the right screen, figure out what's happening on the VM, and take corrective action. And also, while we do all of that, we place a lot of value and emphasis on design, that things should not just be merely functional, but when you use it, it's much like what Apple did with the iPhone, right? Yes, it does all of the things, but when it came out, the reason iPhone became successful is because with consumers, there was an emotional connection, right? It was really good for the first few months to hold the iPhone in your hands and to be able to do the things that you couldn't do with the technology that existed prior. And that's what we want with our management consoles. We want people to actually feel engaged when they are at it. Now, you can see, if I take a step back and present hyperconvergence in a broader perspective, and if you ask the question, so where is all this leading to? And our view is that Nutanix is all about making infrastructure invisible. And what we mean by that is that the best infrastructure is infrastructure that you can't see. And why is that? Because the more infrastructure recedes into the background, it means it's more time for you. It's more time for you to think, hey, my business, if we had a workflow that we changed this way, would it give me a leg up compared to the competition? You can't do that today because you don't have the time. The businesses are asking for things. Hey, marketing wants to run this new campaign. They want to test out, blah, blah. Can IT help? No. Why? Oh, we have only 5 people, and all of the 5 people at any given day are either fighting fires or doing upgrades and things like that. That's it. So the promise of invisible infrastructure is we want to get to a point where the infrastructure essentially just runs in and of itself, and it frees you from all of those mundane things. Now, as in any big journey, it will come in several stages and phases. If you look at what Nutanix we have done when we came to market with our product, it was, in some sense, making storage invisible. All of that complexity around LUNs, LUN masking, fiber channel zoning, iSCSI, all of that just went away. You go to Nutanix, and storage, like I said, even 10-year-olds can configure and provision a Nutanix environment. The next step, which we announced in our first user conference, .next, in Miami a couple of months back, is all about making the virtualization layer invisible. And if you look at it, the typical data center, you remember the stack, the physical infrastructure, then you have virtualization, and then you have the applications. Anytime you have explicit layers, there's people that's needed to manage and maintain the different interfaces, right? Anytime you can converge, it just becomes one entity that you deal with. It brings about simplification, and that's what we'll do. And then the final step in the journey is all about making the cloud invisible. And that has to do with the cloud not just being a destination, but being a seamless bridge between private infrastructure and public ones. So what we announced is Nutanix right now is a 2-product company. We have the Acropolis product, which has a distributed storage fabric, and that is the layer that you bring in, where if you want a replacement for your traditional 3-tier architecture, the Acropolis product, the distributed storage fabric, it fills that need. But more importantly, what we announced is our application mobility fabric, and essentially the introduction of the Nutanix virtual management stack. Our Acropolis hypervisor, which is a variant of KVM, and then our management suite that goes along with that. Now, why are we doing it? It's all about giving choice and flexibility back to you. You have an environment where ESXi and VMware is the right virtual stack to run. By all means, go for it. Nutanix is going to be the best infrastructure for that. You have an environment, there's cost pressures, you anyway are a Microsoft shop, and you are looking at Microsoft Hyper-V. By all means, run Hyper-V on Nutanix. We're going to be ideal for that. But we'll give you another choice. If you want to experience the power of a truly converged physical and virtual infrastructure, where the two things are not disparate entities, then you can try our Acropolis hypervisor. You have a test dev environment, right? See the power of the Nutanix Acropolis hypervisor on that. You have a remote office, a branch office environment that you would like to virtualize, but you can't because of the licensing costs on the hypervisor side. Take us out for a spin. See. The point is that we are on this journey of truly simplifying and converging higher and higher abstraction levels in the stack. And all of that is going to be wrapped around with Prism, our management product, which is really about just making things simple. One-click upgrades, one-click provisioning, one-click remediation. It is the point at which you go, look, you don't have to actively manage infrastructure. You just tell the infrastructure what you want it to do, and the infrastructure does it. Now, if you look at data centers, the last real big shift was virtualization. And if you look at what VMware did, And they are a phenomenal company, and they have incredible technology. And if you look at what they did to the data center, they freed applications from servers. What do we mean by that? Prior to VMware and virtualization, you had an application running on 5 HP servers. And for whatever reasons, you wanted to move that environment to 5 Dell servers. That was not a trivial operation back then. Again, months of planning, effort, you bring it in, how do I image that, blah, 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 blah. That was what the state of the art back then was. VMware came around, and with VMware, that activity became one click. Right? You have some VMs running on HP, you just get a few Dell servers, put it in, hit click, vMotion, you are done. VMware simplified compute. And you look at the power of simplification in technology in a specific data center context. VMware went, now in about 15 years, we have gone to the point where it's almost like virtualization is an inevitability. It's the starting point. You got to have a good reason why not to virtualize a workload. That's the power of simplification. And you take that and you look at hyperconvergence in that context. Hyperconvergence, what we do today, right now, what Nutanix first came to market with, converging compute and storage, is bringing that simplification at a higher grain. It's bringing the simplification at the full physical infrastructure stack. Then, where we are going with our Acropolis hypervisor and our application mobility fabric, it's yet another higher level of abstraction. We are converging physical and virtual infrastructure. But we won't stop there. The journey, in our view, the full promise of hyperconvergence is when we converge private and public infrastructure. Today, the industry, when we talk about cloud, you think of cloud as a destination. Oh, I'm going to move the workload to AWS or Microsoft Azure. In our view, that's not the right framework. We believe that the final promise is of intent-based infrastructure. It's possible, it has to be possible, to write systems that essentially you come in and you say, look, I have an application, these are the application requirements, and the system figures out, right now, this application automatically should be provisioned on your data center. For something else, the system figures out, what, this application is better run in AWS or Azure. And that's what we mean by truly converging private and public infrastructure. And we will take our Prism technology and over the years build and introduce capabilities into it that eventually will make sure that the cloud is invisible. You don't have to actively make the decisions. You just specify what your business needs. That I need to have 5 nines availability. I need to have a request rate of 1,000 requests per second that the application needs to meet. Anything else, let the system figure it out. Whether it's right now the right choice to run it in your data center or some public cloud, that should be system-derived. So if you look at what has been going on pretty much over the last 2 decades, is most IT infrastructure teams have been held back by infrastructure. Their businesses, they want them to do things that's more relevant and meaningful, but the infrastructure teams can't. Infrastructure is holding them back. Routine, mundane things, complexity, it's killing them. And it's not letting them do what the business wants them to do. And if you sum it all up, what Nutanix truly does is we hope to elevate IT. And by elevating IT, what we mean is we give you your time back. We give you your time back so that you can think and do things that are more relevant for your business. And in that process, we hope to make your business succeed, and we hope to make you succeed as well. Thank you.